Section 1. Dawn over a lagoon of ships. Welcome to Soldiers' Lost Voices, a military history storytelling channel centered on the human side of war. We go beyond tactical maps and body counts to bring conflict to life through wartime letters, frontline diaries, memoirs, and first-hand accounts. Before we begin, answer this in the comments. If you had only seconds to decide and everything was at stake, what would you do? In today's episode, we step into they couldn't believe the safe anchorage that turned into a 2-day catastrophe. And by the end, you'll understand why safety, based on reputation, is fragile. The 17th of February, 1944. Dawn over a lagoon that looks too calm to be real. The water is a flat pane of pewter, and the islands around it sit like dark teeth on the horizon. From above, the anchorage is a catalog, hulls at rest, mooring lines, slack wakes absent the visual language of safety. At 5:52 a.m., a thin wind slides across the deck of a carrier and turns the first breath of morning into something sharp and metallic. Petty Officer Jack Mercer, a radar plotter by rate a sleepwalker by exhaustion, presses a pencil against a grease-slick plotting board and tries to keep his hand steady. Action, he draws a contact line that keeps shifting. Body sensation, his eyes burn as if sand has been poured beneath the lids. Micro-choice, he chooses to double-check the bearing before calling it up because a wrong angle is a wrong launch and a wrong launch is a wasted minute. The manual says a fortress base stays safe because it's well defended. Reality says a fortress is only as safe as the air above it. On the status board near him, chalk marks list what is ready, what is refueling, what is late. The chalk dust clings to his fingertips and turns them white. A chalk-smudged deck status board feels like a harmless office tool until the first wave is ordered and those chalk strokes become a countdown. At 5:52, a voice in his headset drops into the net with clipped certainty. It's not a speech, not a slogan, just an operational fragment that could live in a logbook. Launch on schedule. Maintain radio discipline. The words are ordinary. The timing is not. Scoreboard 5:52 a.m. First light. Calm sea. Multiple aircraft spotted on scopes. Minutes to launch, measured in single digits. Here's the impossible math. The lagoon looks like a safe parking lot for a fleet, but safe is only a story the environment lets you tell. A base can be a fortress on paper and a trap in practice, especially when the attackers arrive with air superiority and a clock they control. The choice appears before anyone says it aloud. Wait and lose, let the enemy keep a secure logistics hub intact for the next campaign. Or do the thing nobody wants to believe is possible, strike deep into an anchorage that reputation has wrapped in armor, and do it with timing so tight the defenders can't breathe between alarms. Jack's inner conflict is embarrassingly simple. He wants the contacts to be a false return, a trick of sea clutter, because believing the truth means admitting how much rests on a few inches of pencil line. The rule against confusion is simple. One contact, one call, one action. A small loop opens in his mind. What does a safe anchorage sound like when it stops being safe? 30 seconds later, it closes when the first warning bell ripples through the ship and becomes a vibration in his teeth. A bigger loop opens and refuses to close if Truk, a name spoken like a synonym for security, can be hit. What else in this war is only safe? Because people keep repeating that it is switch point of view. Down in the lagoon, a sailor on a moored ship hears the first distant engine note and thinks it's routine. He looks at the flat water and the still hulls and believes the myth for one more heartbeat. Mini payoff arrives as a near loss. A radio call overlaps. Two voices collide and Jack forces himself to wait for clarity instead of adding noise. The net clears. The launch sequence continues. Discipline holds. Then the cliff edge, the first wave is already in the air. and the lagoon below is about to learn in real time that reputation is not armor. It's just a habit of thought, and habits can be broken in hours. Section 2. The first wave and the first mistake. At 6:21 a.m. Sunlight spills across the deck in a narrow band as if the day is trying to stay small. The carrier's surface is warm in patches and cold in others, and every metal edge sweats faintly in the morning air. In the plot, Jack Mercer listens to the net and feels time tighten like a strap across the ribs. Action, he erases a chalk mark on a chalk-smudged deck, status board, and redraws it cleaner. Body sensation, the eraser grit bites into his thumb. Micro-choice, he chooses to keep the board updated in real time instead of relying on memory because memory is where confusion hides. The manual says, secure anchorage means layered defenses will respond in order. Reality says the first minutes decide whether defenses even wake up in sequence. The tactical decision belongs to the attackers and feels like a law of physics to everyone under it. Hit airfields and logistics at the same time as ships. Not because it's dramatic, because it collapses the defenders' choices. The cost is coordination stress. If timing slips, the defenders recover in the gaps. The rule against overreacting is simple. You don't chase the first fire. You protect the pattern. Evidence drop comes as an as-if line from a strike summary that reads too plain for what it means. Primary targets, airfields, ships at anchor, fuel, and supply points. It sounds clinical. It is not. Timestamp beats a WWII. First strikes reported. Comms busy. Defenders scrambling. Daylight strengthening. Jack keeps his posture rigid because the moment he slumps is the moment his mind starts to drift. He watches how information arrives first as a tone in the net, then as a sentence, then as a chalk mark, then as a new rule everyone follows without naming it. The war is full of loud events, but it's built out of quiet conversions, confusion turning into procedure, fear turning into discipline. Below the lagoon still looks deceptively orderly in patches, and that order tempts people into thinking the catastrophe is exaggeration. It isn't. It's simply paced by waves. He forces his mind back to the concrete glare smoke the way his glove sticks to metal. Within a minute, he chooses one detail and repeats it to himself. He doesn't want memory to soften. He wants it to stay sharp enough to teach. Outside, the deck crew moves like a practiced roomer. Jerseys flash, hands point, bodies lean away from prop wash. The air tastes like exhaust and wet rope. Jack can't see the lagoon from here, but he can feel it as a concept, a place the war has labeled secure the way a man labels a door locked because he wants to sleep. Scoreboard minutes since first launch. Multiple target clusters inside lagoon. Radio traffic rising. Defender reaction window shrinking. 2 open loops drive the tension. Small loop. Why hit airfields first if ships are right there? It closes within a minute when the logic clicks into place. Grounded aircraft can't intercept and grounded fuel can't move. Taking the sky removes the defender's steering wheel. The small loop about airfields closes even harder. When Jack hears a second report, the defender's fighters are being caught on the ground, and the sky above the lagoon is being emptied of options. It's not cruelty. It's procedure. Remove the interceptors and the rest of the strike becomes arithmetic. Big loop, can the defenders reorganize fast enough to make the next waves pay? That loop stays open because the next hours will test whether fortress means resilience or only confidence. Switch point of view to the lagoon. A Japanese logistics officer steps onto a quay and smells fuel on the wind, not the faint, normal odor of stored supply, but the sharp scent of something ruptured. He sees smoke rise from a direction that's supposed to be protected. His body sensation is a sudden hollowness in the stomach. His micro-choice is to run toward a warehouse instead of a shelter, because he knows the base lives or dies by what it can still move. Coordination failure arrives with a cost. that isn't glamorous. Alarms ring out of sequence. Orders conflict. One warning pulls people toward ships while another pulls them toward runways. The cost is delay, the only currency the attackers need. A minute lost is a runway not cleared, a gun not manned, a tanker still full of fuel. Jack hears overlapping calls on the net and feels his pulse in his throat. Inner conflict line, he wants to shout over everyone and force order, but he knows shouting is not order. Mini payoff, the carrier's net regains discipline. Calls shorten, rolls settle. That invisible order keeps the waves moving without tripping over themselves. A second scoreboard beats small but telling fits in one breath. Fuel state reports start to matter now. Every extra vector and every extra minute in the pattern steals endurance from the day. And the cliff edge, the defenders are now awake, which means the next runs won't be surprise. They will be contested. A safe anchorage becomes a test of how long a base can keep believing its own story while the story burns away. Section 3. Logistics on fire, silence on the radio. At 7:03 a.m., the lagoon's smoke begins to layer. It doesn't rise cleanly. It hangs low, turning distances into guesses. The water still looks calm in the spaces between plumes, and that contrast is part of the horror. The surface stays smooth while everything above it becomes chaos. Jack Mercer watches a chalk-smudged deck status board like it's a living thing. Action, he taps the chalk beside a squadron mark, then writes back in and underlines it. Body sensation, his knuckles ache from gripping the edge of the table. Micro-choice, he chooses to keep his voice flat when he reports a new contact cluster, because fear in a voice spreads faster than any signal. The manual says you can measure a battle by what sinks or survives. Reality says you measure it by what can still be supplied tomorrow. The tactical decision now is about prioritization. Do you keep striking ships, or do you keep tearing at the base's ability to feed and fuel the next campaign? The cost is opportunity. Every minute spent on one target is a minute another target survives. The rule against tunnel vision is simple. You don't fall in love with the obvious target. Evidence drop arrives as a clipped as if message passed between staff. Secondary focus, logistics and fuel storage. It sounds like bureaucracy. It is strategy made physical. Timestamp beats 7:03 a.m. Smoke thickening. Target visibility uneven. Radio discipline strained. Jack keeps his posture rigid because the moment he slumps is the moment his mind starts to drift. He watches how information arrives, first as a tone in the net, then as a sentence, then as a chalk mark, then as a new rule everyone follows without naming it. The war is full of loud events, but it's built out of quiet conversions, confusion turning into procedure, fear turning into discipline. Below, the lagoon still looks deceptively orderly in patches, and that order tempts people into thinking the catastrophe is exaggeration. It isn't. It's simply paced by waves. He forces his mind back to the concrete glare, smoke the way his glove sticks to metal. Within a minute, he chooses one detail and repeats it to himself. He doesn't want memory to soften. He wants it to stay sharp enough to teach. Jack keeps watching the same corner of the board where ready becomes airborne. The chalk smudges under his palm, and he realizes the base below is doing the same thing with its own ledgers, trying to turn chaos back into order with lists, stamps, and shouted priorities. Lists don't stop bombs, but they can keep a person from freezing. Scoreboard smoke density up, target identification harder. Calm, overlaps increasing. Minutes between waves tightening, small loop. How do you find a target in smoke without wasting a pass? It closes when Jack hears a calm call describing wake patterns and shoreline geometry. Not names, not pride, just the practical language of pilots who learn to see through. Mess. The small loop about finding targets closes with a hard sensory detail. Pilots call out the way smoke rolls off a ridge, the way the lagoon's color changes near a reef, the way a wake cuts through glare. Those are the only landmarks left when the big, confident labels stop working. Big loop, will the anchorage's reputation survive this morning? That loop stays open because reputation dies slower than steel until it doesn't. Switch point of view on a ship in the lagoon. A gun crew tries to spot attackers through smoke. The barrel is hot enough to shimmer. A sailor's hands tremble not from cowardice but from adrenaline and heat. He makes a micro-choice to keep firing even when he can't see the target clearly, because doing nothing feels worse than doing something wrong. Coordination failure shows up as misread bearing range, the kind that happens when smoke turns a ship's outline into a smear. A call goes out, contact left when the angle is off. The cost is a wasted approach that forces a re-vector, and re-vectoring costs time, fuel, and exposure to defensive fire. Inner conflict line. Jack realizes he is praying for clarity, and he hates that clarity in war usually arrives as damage. Safety based on reputation is fragile. He doesn't say it out loud yet. He just watches the chalk marks on the board and feels how quickly a safe label can become a lie. Small. Detail motif evolves. A chalk-smudged deck status board stops being administrative and becomes a conscience. Every chalk stroke is a decision. What you commit to, what you delay, what you risk, what you abandon. Mini payoff. A clean handoff occurs between wave reports and recovery calls. The system holds together long enough to keep pressure on the base. Cliff edge, smoke, and confusion are now a shield for the defenders and a threat to the attackers. The next phase will be about timing, whether air superiority can keep turning chaos into advantage, or whether the fog of war finally turns both sides equally blind. Section 4. The fortress myth meets air superiority. At 8:19 a.m., the sun is fully up and the lagoon's surface has turned bright enough to hurt. The glare bounces into the cockpit of returning aircraft and into the eyes of men who haven't blinked properly in hours. The day feels too clean for what it's holding. Jack Mercer's action is to listen for gaps, the silences between transmissions that tell him someone missed a call. Body sensation, his jaw aches from clenching. Micro-choice, he chooses to ask for a repeat instead of guessing, because guessing is how coordination fails. The manual says fixed bases can absorb punishment and remain operational. Reality says air superiority turns fixed into exposed. The tactical decision is an isolation move, keep the base pinned so it can't function as a staging point before the next campaign. The cost is persistence. A single spectacular strike is not enough. You have to come back again and again until the base's visible logistics become unusable. The rule against complacency is simple. You don't assume the second wave will be easier than the first. Evidence drop an as-if line from a planning note that never mentions heroism. Objective neutralize base capacity and isolate strongholds. Simple words, heavy consequence. Timestamp beat 8:19 a.m. Defenders adapting. Anti-air fire more organized. Attackers cycling waves. Jack keeps his posture rigid because the moment he slumps is the moment his mind starts to drift. He watches how information arrives first as a tone in the net, then as a sentence, then as a chalk mark, then as a new rule everyone follows without naming it. The war is full of loud events, but it's built out of quiet conversions, confusion turning into procedure, fear turning into discipline. Below, the lagoon still looks deceptively orderly in patches, and that order tempts people into thinking the catastrophe is exaggeration. It isn't. It's simply paced by waves. He forces his mind back to the concrete glare smoke the way his glove sticks to metal. Within a minute, he chooses one detail and repeats it to himself. He doesn't want memory to soften. He wants it to stay sharp enough to teach. Jack notices how the net changes when everyone understands the day is no longer opening strikes. It becomes a rhythm: launch, report, recover, rearm, launch again. The rhythm is the weapon. Break the rhythm and you give the base a breath. Keep the rhythm and you turn a famous anchorage into a place that can't keep up with its own emergencies. Scoreboard: defender response sharper. Time between waves shortening. Fatigue rising. Identification in glare worsening. Small loop if defenses are improving, what keeps attackers from being repelled. It closes when the answer shows itself in procedure. Disciplined timing, clean lanes, and the ability to restrike before repairs can matter. The small loop closes with a tiny proof of procedure. A call sign repeats the same short phrase twice, not because the pilot is nervous, but because redundancy is what disciplined people do when the world is loud. Big loop: is this a one-off humiliation or a strategic turning point that reshapes basing choices in the Central Pacific? That loop will close later when we see what reputation collapse does to real decisions. Switch point of view in the lagoon. An officer on a damaged airfield stares at cratered surfaces and scattered equipment. He feels the uncanny quiet between waves, a quiet that should mean relief, but instead means they're coming back. He makes a micro-choice to move what he can under cover because hiding becomes the only form of logistics left. Coordination failure hits as formation drift. Glare and smoke distort spacing, and one flight slides too tight on another's wing. The cost is a near mid-air correction that burns fuel and forces a wider turn that places them in defensive fire for longer. Inner conflict line: Jack wonders if the system he's part of is a machine or a fragile arrangement of tired human beings pretending to be a machine. Small. Detail motif shifts again. A chalk-smudged deck status board is now a scoreboard of strain. The chalk smears where sweat lands. The clean lines from dawn have turned into hurried marks. The board is aging in real time, like the myth of a fortress aging under pressure. Mini payoff: a recovery cycle completes without incident. Aircraft come back in orderly sequence. The invisible discipline beats the visible chaos for now. Cliff edge: day one isn't over, and the defenders are learning. If timing is the attacker's weapon, then the defender's counter is to survive long enough to disrupt the rhythm. The next hours will test whether the fortress myth dies quickly or fights to live. Section 5. Nightfall repairs and the second day's trap. At 6:04 p.m., the light drops and turns the lagoon into a bowl of shadow. Smoke becomes less visible but not less real. The day's damage doesn't end because the sun goes down. It changes jobs. Now the base tries to patch itself, to move what can still move, to hide what can't. Jack Mercer finally steps away from the table long enough to feel his legs. Action: he rubs chalk dust off his fingers and finds it won't fully come off. Body sensation: his lower back tightens like a knot. Micro-choice: he chooses to return to the plot instead of sleeping because tomorrow's first hour will punish anyone who is slow. The manual says night brings a reset and a chance to reorganize. Reality says night only gives you time to make the next mistake quietly. The tactical decision shifts to patience. With a knife, hold pressure so the base can't truly recover, then return at first light when tired repairs and exhausted defenders create new vulnerabilities. The cost is endurance. Both sides will pay it in sleep and attention. The rule against fatigue is simple. You do your checks even when you hate them. Evidence drop comes as if, maintenance log line plain and stubborn. Fuel handling disrupted. Priority to restore runways and communications. Not a confession, just an admission that logistics is the bloodstream. Timestamp: beat, say 04 p.m. Day 1 closing. Repairs underway. Watch rotations thin. Next day planning in motion. Jack keeps his posture rigid because the moment he slumps is the moment his mind starts to drift. He watches how information arrives first, as a tone in the net, then as a sentence, then as a chalk mark, then as a new rule everyone follows without naming it. The war is full of loud events, but it's built out of quiet conversions, confusion turning into procedure, fear turning into discipline. Below, the lagoon still looks deceptively orderly in patches, and that order tempts people into thinking the catastrophe is exaggeration. It isn't. It's simply paced by waves. He forces his mind back to the concrete glare, smoke the way his glove sticks to metal. Within a minute, he chooses one detail and repeats it to himself. He doesn't want memory to soften. He wants it to stay sharp enough to teach. The night smells like damp canvas and hot metal cooling. Somewhere below, men drag hoses, move crates, and try to make the base look alive again before dawn exposes what can't be hidden. Jack imagines their hands by lantern light and hates how familiar the feeling is. Everyone in this war is rebuilding something under pressure, whether it's a runway or a nerve. Scoreboard daylight gone. Repair window hours long. Defender readiness uncertain. Attacker return window fixed to dawn. Small loop. What does a base do when its safe story has been punctured? It closes when we see the answer. It tries to rebuild the story with motion moving, supplies hiding aircraft, restoring comms, because motion is the only proof of life. Big loop. Does the catastrophe stay contained to 2 days, or does it ripple into future basing choices across the Central Pacific? That loop stays open. The big loop about ripples stays open, but it grows teeth when a hub becomes a warning. The next campaign inherits a shortcut. Not a moral shortcut, a geographic one. Switch point of view. A mechanic on the base works by lantern light, hands black with grease. His body sensation is tremor from overwork. His micro choice is to patch a line that will get one truck moving instead of trying to fix everything, because triage is how systems pretend they're still whole. Coordination failure appears as conflicting orders across the night. Protect communications, protect fuel, protect ships, protect airfields. Too many priorities, not enough hands. The cost is diluted effort. Nothing becomes fully restored, and partial restoration is easy to break at dawn. Inner conflict line. Jack feels a strange guilt that the enemy gets a night to struggle because he knows what it feels like to fight sleep while pretending to be precise. Small. Detail motif changes, meaning again a chalk-smudged deck status board becomes a prophecy. The chalk marks for tomorrow's launches look like an accusation, a reminder that timing is coming back and the base will have to face it again. Mini payoff planning remains coherent. The carrier group stays disciplined, and dawn will find them ready. Cliff edge. The second day will not be a repeat. It will be a trap. Repairs, smoke, and exhaustion will distort reality, and the next morning will decide whether a 2-day catastrophe is a headline or a strategic fracture that never fully heals. Section 6, February 18. Timing becomes a weapon. At 5:39 a.m., on the 18th of February 1944, dawn returns with the same indifferent beauty. The sky is pale, the horizon clean, the sea calm enough to mock the memory of yesterday. That calm is dangerous. It tempts everyone into thinking the clock has restarted. Jack Mercer's action is to mark the new day on a chalk-smudged deck status board with a fresh line of chalk, as if the clean stroke can make the world clean again. Body sensation. His eyelids flutter with micro-sleeps he catches just in time. Micro-choice. He chooses to sip bitter coffee, even though it turns his stomach, because he needs his brain more than he needs comfort. The manual says defenders will be most alert after a first strike. Reality says exhaustion makes alertness brittle. The tactical decision is brutal, and simple: return early before repairs become strength. The cost is risk. flying into a base that now expects you. You trade surprise for momentum, betting that momentum is more decisive than stealth. The rule against hesitation is simple. You commit to the window, or you lose it. Evidence drop arrives like an operational line that could be stamped and filed. Second day strikes to prevent restoration of air and logistics capacity. The sentence sounds like paperwork. It is a second punch. Timestamp beat 5:3 m. Second day. First light. Defenders exhausted. Attackers on schedule. Jack keeps his posture rigid because the moment he slumps is the moment his mind starts to drift. He watches how information arrives first as a tone in the net, then as a sentence, then as a chalk mark, then as a new rule everyone follows without naming it. The war is full of loud events, but it's built out of quiet conversions, confusion turning into procedure, fear turning into discipline. Below, the lagoon still looks deceptively orderly in patches, and that order tempts people into thinking the catastrophe is exaggeration. It isn't. It's simply paced by waves. He forces his mind back to the concrete glare smoke the way his glove sticks to metal. Within a minute, he chooses one detail and repeats it to himself. He doesn't want memory to soften. He wants it to stay sharp enough to teach. Jack hears the first reports of dawn strikes as if they're coming from a distant room, not because the sound is faint, but because fatigue builds a wall between you and meaning. He forces himself to touch the chalkboard, to feel the dust, to anchor his mind in something physical. The war wants you to float. Procedure pulls you back. Scoreboard hours since last strike. Defender fatigue high. Repair gains partial. Attacker timing precise. Small loop. If defenders are expecting the attack, why does timing still matter? It closes when we see the answer. Expectation doesn't create fuel, doesn't rebuild runways instantly, doesn't restore a shattered logistics chain. Timing attacks the gap between we know and we can. Big loop. Does this 2-day event reshape basing choices? It tightens because reputation doesn't just crack, it shatters in public, and public fear changes planning. Switch point of view. A defender on an airfield hears engines and feels the sick certainty that yesterday wasn't a storm passing through, it was a new climate. He makes a micro choice to move toward a gun position rather than a shelter because he knows the only hope is to slow the rhythm. Coordination failure returns as comm overlap. Tired voices, hurried calls, different priorities. The cost is seconds lost to clarification. Those seconds are exactly what the attackers are spending like currency. A warning comes late. A gun is manned late. A truck turns down the wrong lane. The comm overlap has a sharper cost here. A warning comes half a breath late, and that half breath becomes a longer exposure on a straight run. You can't measure it in heroism. You measure it in how long a pilot must keep the nose steady while the world tries to knock it loose. Safety, based on reputation, is fragile. Inner conflict line. Jack realizes timing is a weapon and also a mercy, because ending a base's capacity quickly can mean fewer long grinding fights later. Small. Detail motif evolves. The chalkboard is now a moral ledger. Each mark is a claim that procedure can beat chaos. The smudges and corrections are proof that chaos keeps trying. Mini payoff. The strike coordination stays intact. The waves cycle. The pattern holds under pressure. Cliff edge. The base's reputation is now in free fall. The next question isn't whether it can be hit, it's what happens to strategy when a safe anchorage becomes a lesson everyone can see from the air. Section 7. The reputation collapses in 48 hours. At 9:11 a.m., the second day's smoke rises into a cleaner sky than yesterday's, and that makes the damage easier to read. There is a cruel clarity to it. You can see what is broken, what is burning, what is stranded. The lagoon's stillness becomes an accusation. Jack Mercer's action is to quietly erase a chalk mark that no longer matches reality. Body sensation, his fingers tremble when he tries to make the board neat again. Micro-choice, he chooses not to pretty up the information. He leaves a smear visible because the smear is honest. The manual says reputation deters attack because it signals strength. Reality says reputation invites complacency if it replaces verification. The tactical decision is strategic rather than dramatic. Use air power to collapse a base's function so future operations can bypass and isolate strongholds instead of storming them head-on. The cost is time in the present, so you can buy time in the future. The rule against illusion is simple. You don't confuse a place's name with its capability. Evidence drop an as-if line from a post-strike assessment that refuses to dramatize. Base capacity significantly reduced. Anchorage no longer considered secure. No adjectives needed. The meaning is the crater. Assessment note. Anchorage security assumption invalidated. Dispersal recommended. Timestamp beat 911A. Second day effects visible. Smoke thinner. Assessment taking shape. Jack keeps his posture rigid because the moment he slumps is the moment his mind starts to drift. He watches how information arrives first as a tone in the net, then as a sentence, then as a chalk mark, then as a new rule everyone follows without naming it. The war is full of loud events, but it's built out of quiet conversions, confusion turning into procedure, fear turning into discipline. Below the lagoon still looks deceptively orderly in patches, and that order tempts people into thinking the catastrophe is exaggeration. It isn't. It's simply paced by waves. He forces his mind back to the concrete glare smoke the way his glove sticks to metal. Within a minute, he chooses one detail and repeats it to himself. He doesn't want memory to soften. He wants it to stay sharp enough to teach. The phrase secure anchorage now feels like a joke told by yesterday's self. Jack can almost see the word written in a manual margin underlined by someone who wanted certainty. He thinks about how systems fail, not all at once, but fast, a chain of assumptions snapping in public. Scoreboard 4-8. Hour window closing. Base capacity degraded. Defensive rhythm broken. Attacker control sustained. Small loop. How can a base feel safe until the exact moment it isn't? It closes with a simple truth. Safety was partly a story told by distance and habit. Once air superiority arrived, distance and habit stopped working. Big loop closes here. Truk's reputation as a secure fleet anchorage collapses in 2 days. And that collapse reshapes how basing is chosen in the Central Pacific. Not because everyone suddenly becomes wiser, because fear and evidence force a change. Switch point of view, a planner far away draws new lines on a map. The base that used to be a hub becomes a warning. Routes shift, assumptions change. The ripple is quiet but permanent. Coordination failure appears as a final misread contact that sends one flight toward a decoy smoke plume. The cost is a wasted sortie minute and a chance for defenders to move what little they can. Even in dominance, the fog of war steals efficiency. Inner conflict line, Jack feels a hard pride that his side's procedure works, and a softer dread that procedure can also blind you if you start believing your own myth. Safety based on reputation is fragile. It isn't philosophy. It's a summary of what the chalkboard now shows in smudged human handwriting. Small, detail motif becomes a lesson anchor. A chalk-smudged deck status board started the episode as a routine tool. Now it is proof that safety is something you constantly earn, not something you inherit from a name. Mini payoff, the assessment is clear enough to guide the next step. A stronghold has been isolated without a ground invasion. That is the strategic point: isolate before the next campaign. Cliff Edge, the story doesn't end with smoke. It ends with a question that belongs outside war. When your world calls something safe, do you verify or do you relax until reality corrects you in public? Section 8. What's your Truk moment? At 1:28 a.m., the radio net finally thins. Not because the world is quiet, but because the immediate crisis has been converted into a plan. The lagoon is still there, the island still sharp, the water still glittering, but the meaning of the place has changed. In 48 hours, a secure anchorage became a cautionary tale, written in timing and air power. Jack Mercer's action is to place his chalk down deliberately and look at his own hand as if seeing it for the first time. Body sensation: his shoulders feel heavy like wet cloth. Micro-choice: he chooses to write one final note on a chalk-smudged deck status board, a small, plain phrase: verify. He doesn't say it to anyone. He leaves it there for himself. The manual says, once the objective is achieved, you stand down and recover. Reality says the lesson is only useful if you carry it forward. The tactical decision that echoes beyond these 2 days is the choice to isolate strongholds before the next campaign, to turn logistics visible, vulnerable, and decisive. The cost is patience and relentless timing. The payoff is fewer impossible fights later, fewer places where fortress becomes a synonym for blood and months. The rule against forgetting is simple. You write down what the environment taught you before comfort edits it. Timestamp: beat 1:28 a.m. Operations tapering. Assessment: solidifying. Fatigue: undeniable. Jack keeps his posture rigid because the moment he slumps is the moment his mind starts to drift. He watches how information arrives, first as a tone in the net, then as a sentence, then as a chalk mark, then as a new rule everyone follows without naming it. The war is full of loud events, but it's built out of quiet conversions, confusion turning into procedure, fear turning into discipline. Below, the lagoon still looks deceptively orderly in patches, and that order tempts people into thinking the catastrophe is exaggeration. It isn't. It's simply paced by waves. He forces his mind back to the concrete glare smoke, the way his glove sticks to metal. Within a minute, he chooses one detail and repeats it to himself. He doesn't want memory to soften. He wants it to stay sharp enough to teach. Jack keeps his posture rigid because the moment he slumps is the moment his mind starts to drift. He watches how information arrives, first as a tone in the net, then as a sentence, then as a chalk mark, then as a new rule everyone follows without naming it. The war is full of loud events, but it's built out of quiet conversions, confusion turning into procedure, fear turning into discipline. Below, the lagoon still looks deceptively orderly in patches, and that order tempts people into thinking the catastrophe is exaggeration. It isn't. It's simply paced by waves. He forces his mind back to the concrete glare smoke, the way his glove sticks to metal. Within a minute, he chooses one detail and repeats it to himself. He doesn't want memory to soften. He wants it to stay sharp enough to teach. Jack's shoulders loosen for the first time and then tighten again because relief is suspicious in war. Relief is when you miss the final hazard, the small lapse, the late call, the assumption that the lesson has already been learned. Scoreboard 2-day window complete. Base function reduced. Attacker rhythm sustained. Defenders forced into new basing logic. Small loop. What detail will Jack remember when the noise fades? It closes when he looks at the chalk dust still trapped in the grooves of his skin. It's not a medal. It's residue. Big loop closes here as a human question. What's your Truk moment? The place system or reputation you treated as safe until timing and reality proved otherwise. Switch point of view. We return briefly to the lagoon, not for spectacle, but for ships. Ships at rest become ships under stress. A base's identity becomes a liability. Strategy isn't only ships and planes, it's assumptions. Coordination failure gets its final humble mention. Even at the end, a delayed call forces a minor course correction. The cost is small now, a few seconds, but the lesson is not. Coordination is never solved. It's only maintained. Inner conflict line. Jack realizes the scariest part is how normal this feels. By the end, how quickly humans adapt to catastrophe and call it routine. A chalk-smudged deck status board has completed its evolution tool. Risk marker, guilt token, lesson anchor. Safety based on reputation is fragile. Salt air, chalk dust, and fatigue, those are small things. But they are where truth hides when big labels start to lie. A fortress isn't a title, it's a condition, and conditions change. Cliff edge. The world will call new places safe next. The only defense is to treat safety as a condition you verify, not a reputation you inherit. Section 9. The map room ripple. At 2:46 p.m., well after the loudest hours, the war does what it always does. It turns into paper. Messages become summaries. Smoke becomes lines on a map. The lagoon becomes a label with a date range next to it, February 17, 181944, and the label has consequences that travel farther than any aircraft. Jack Mercer finally walks past a chalk-smudged deck status board and feels the strange emptiness of leaving it behind. Action. He folds a battered message pad and tucks it into his pocket. Body sensation. His fingertips sting where chalk has dried the skin. Micro-choice. He chooses not to throw the pad away because he wants proof that the day was real and not just fatigue hallucinating in uniform. The manual says decisions are made by commanders with full information. Reality says decisions are made with partial information and a deadline that doesn't care. The tactical decision now belongs to planners. How do you exploit a base whose reputation has collapsed? Do you commit resources to finish it completely, or do you reallocate to the next objective, trusting that isolation will do the rest? The cost is opportunity. Every asset used here is an asset not used somewhere else, and the calendar is always moving. The rule against wishful thinking is simple. You treat damaged as still dangerous until proven otherwise. Evidence drop arrives in the driest language imaginable. Recommendation: adjust basing assumptions. Prioritize isolation of remaining strong points. It reads like a memo. It is a rewiring of strategy. Timestamp: beat 2:46 p.m. Post-strike planning. Information consolidation. Next steps debated. Jack keeps his posture rigid because the moment he slumps is the moment his mind starts to drift. He watches how information arrives, first as a tone in the net, then as a sentence, then as a chalk mark, then as a new rule everyone follows without naming it. The war is full of loud events, but it's built out of quiet conversions, confusion turning into procedure, fear turning into discipline. Below, the lagoon still looks deceptively orderly in patches, and that order tempts people into thinking the catastrophe is exaggeration. It isn't. It's simply paced by waves. He forces his mind back to the concrete glare smoke the way his glove sticks to metal. Within a minute, he chooses one detail and repeats it to himself. He doesn't want memory to soften. He wants it to stay sharp enough to teach. Jack keeps his posture rigid because the moment he slumps is the moment his mind starts to drift. He watches how information arrives, first as a tone in the net, then as a sentence, then as a chalk mark, then as a new rule everyone follows without naming it. The war is full of loud events, but it's built out of quiet conversions, confusion turning into procedure, fear turning into discipline. Below, the lagoon still looks deceptively orderly in patches, and that order tempts people into thinking the catastrophe is exaggeration. It isn't. It's simply paced by waves. He forces his mind back to the concrete glare smoke the way his glove sticks to metal. Within a minute, he chooses one detail and repeats it to himself. He doesn't want memory to soften. He wants it to stay sharp enough to teach. Scoreboard time since strikes measured in hours. Repair potential uncertain. Future campaign timetable pressing. Basing confidence reduced. Small loop. What does it mean for a base's reputation to collapse? It closes when we see the map room answer route shift. Staging plans move outward. Safe becomes too exposed, and exposed places stop being hubs. Big loop. Does this lesson change how the Central Pacific is fought? It tightens toward closure because the logic is now visible. Isolate what you don't need to storm. Cut the logistics you can see, and let strongholds wither instead of bleed you. Switch point of view. A staff officer taps the map with a pencil and says a base's name as if it's a caution sign. He isn't gloating. He's recalibrating. His micro-choice is to leave emotion out of the briefing because emotion doesn't move fuel or aircraft, but assumptions do. Coordination failure appears in a quieter form, conflicting interpretations of damage. One report says capacity is reduced, another implies neutralized. The cost is the risk of overconfidence, the same disease reputation used to carry. Jack hears the back and forth and realizes that even after the strikes, coordination can fail in language. Inner conflict line. Jack wants certainty so badly it scares him, because he knows certainty is where bad assumptions grow. Small detail motif evolves again. A chalk-smudged deck status board isn't on the map room wall, but the principle of it is a few marks, a few corrections, and the discipline to admit what's changed. Chalk is humble. Strategy needs humility too. Mini payoff. The plan that emerges is coherent. Isolate, bypass. Keep pressure where it counts. The lesson becomes a method rather than a memory. Cliff edge. What was learned at Truk will be carried forward, and the next campaign will test whether the victors can avoid the same trap, believing their own systems are safe simply because they worked yesterday. Section 10. The visible logistics lesson. At 4:08 p.m., the sea outside. The carrier group looks empty, and emptiness is deceptive. Empty water is still a road. It still carries fuel, steel, and decisions. In the wake of Operation Hailstone, the real legacy is not just what was struck, it's what became obvious. Logistics can be seen, and anything that can be seen can be timed. Jack Mercer returns one last time to a chalk-smudged deck status board. Action. He runs a finger under a chalk line that marks launch and leaves a faint groove in the dust. Body sensation. He feels the tender bruises where his headset pressed all day. Micro choice. He chooses to write the word verify again. Larger this time because he wants his future self to trip over it. The manual says a safe system stays safe because it has worked before. Reality says safety evaporates when timing and air superiority change the assumptions. The tactical decision that carries forward is the discipline of isolation. Treat strongholds as problems of supply and timing, not just walls to climb. The cost is restraint. Restraint is harder than aggression because it asks you to walk past targets that feel emotionally satisfying and strike the quiet arteries instead. The rule against chasing glory is simple. You hit what sustains the enemy, not what flatters you. Evidence drop comes as an as-if line from an air staff takeaway again, refusing drama. Visible logistics create predictable vulnerabilities when air control is maintained. A sentence you could ignore unless you've lived it. Timestamp beat 4:08 p.m. Lesson codified. Fatigue settling. The day turning into doctrine. Jack keeps his posture rigid because the moment he slumps is the moment his mind starts to drift. He watches how information arrives, first as a tone in the net, then as a sentence, then as a chalk mark, then as a new rule everyone follows without naming it. The war is full of loud events, but it's built out of quiet conversions, confusion turning into procedure, fear turning into discipline. Below the lagoon still looks deceptively orderly in patches, and that order tempts people into thinking the catastrophe is exaggeration. It isn't. It's simply paced by waves. He forces his mind back to the concrete glare, smoke the way his glove sticks to metal. Within a minute, he chooses one detail and repeats it to himself. He doesn't want memory to soften. He wants it to stay sharp enough to teach. Scoreboard operational tempo easing. Lesson moving from radios to briefings. Basing assumptions rewritten. Future campaign edges closer. Small loop. What does a Truk moment look like outside war? It closes with a sensation, not a metaphor. It looks like the moment a familiar system fails fast, and you feel the floor shift, not because the world is cruel, but because your assumptions were out of date. Big loop closes with the thesis itself. Safety based on reputation is fragile. The reason it's true is simple. Reputation is a story. Stories change when facts change. And in February 1944, facts arrived on schedule over a lagoon full of ships. Switch point of view, someone watching from far away, hearing only that a major base was struck, might imagine spectacle. But the human truth is smaller. Tired hands, chalk dust, disciplined calls, and the willingness to keep procedure tight while the environment tries to loosen it. Coordination failure gets its final cost. The lesson can be mislearned. People can take reputation as fragile and turn it into arrogance, believing their own timing makes them invincible. The cost of that mislearning is future surprise, future losses, future correction by reality. Inner conflict line. Jack wonders whether he will ever stop listening for the next alarm, even in quiet rooms. Small detail motif completes its arc tool. Risk marker, guilt token, lesson anchor, now pinned to a word he can carry into life. Verify. If you had only seconds to decide and everything was at stake, what would you do? That question isn't just for war. It's for every moment you trust a safe label because everyone else does. That's soldiers' lost voices, where the smallest details still carry the loudest echoes. Which small detail stayed with you? The chalk dust, the dawn glare, or the timing? And what safe belief in your life deserves a verification run before it becomes your own two-day catastrophe?